Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to the first edition of a brand new review series where I am going to be talking about Batman Caped Crusader Season 2, and today I am going to be talking about Episode 1, the Season 2 premiere, Brute Force, which I have just finished watching. And you know something? This episode was really good. I really enjoyed this one a lot. And, you know, this season has been a huge improvement from the first one for so many reasons. Because I felt with the first season, while there were some very good episodes, which I enjoyed a lot, there were some episodes that were hit and miss as far as I was concerned. And not necessarily so much of the fact that a lot of Batman's rogues gallery were reimagined, given new backstories, new designs. Some of them were completely rethought from the ground up. They were also given some new interpretations. A couple of them have been gender swapped, which did rub some people up the wrong way, including myself. But me being the fan that I am, I wasn't necessarily going to go in there and just completely bash the hell out of the show. I thought to myself, let's give season one a chance, let's hope for the best, and who knows, maybe it could come out on top as a very good show. Coming out of season one, it was okay. And I've said this to a couple of YouTubers in various comment sections that the word okay is not really a word you would want to say about a Batman cartoon. You want to turn around and say, that was epic. Did you watch this week's episode of Batman? It was unbelievable. You want to have that feeling of, oh my god, I really want to see the next episode because I enjoyed that one so much. With season two, for the most part, they kind of got that magic back. You know, that feeling of, I want to see the next episode of Batman. And all due respect to Batman Caped Crusader, it's got the tools and the potential to be a fantastic show. Will it be on the same level as Batman the Animated Series? In all honesty, probably not, because Batman the Animated Series was such a unique cartoon when it came out in 1992, and it changed the game as far as how superhero cartoons were looked at. Now, when I said earlier that Batman Caped Crusader regained some of that old magic, for starters, Batman Caped Crusader brought back the title cards, which I am super pleased about because the title cards I felt were such a huge part of the success of Batman the Animated Series because the title cards made each episode feel like a mini movie. You know, it was like a throwback to the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons of the 1940s. Each episode felt like you were watching a mini movie. And I love the fact that Batman Caped Crusader went back to its roots. Not fully, just a little bit, because I felt that when the title cards were dropped, when BTS changed to TNBA, it lost some of its edge. It lost some of that unique identity that made Batman such a special show. So for Batman Caped Crusader Season 2, they brought back the title cards. And you know what? It's quite amazing how a title card can make such a huge difference because while each episode of Batman Caped Crusader Season 2, they didn't fully feel like mini movies as such, but it definitely felt a bit more special. So it wasn't just watching a generic episode. You saw the title card and it got you pumped. Okay, here we go. This is what today's episode is called. I can't wait. Let's see how this is going to play out. So they've kind of gone back to the roots of BTAS. So this doesn't necessarily make Caped Crusader a prequel of BTAS. They're just going back to what made Batman work and what appealed to the fans. And you know what? For the most part, it worked like a charm and I loved it. And really and truly, they should never have got rid of the title cards in the first place because that's what made BTAS was the title cards and the design for them as well. The designs for the title cards, they were a real throwback to the old crime noir movies of the 1930s where you just had a black and white backdrop, a little bit of smoke, and the big bold capital letters, which works, I think. I wouldn't necessarily want to see some of those abstract designs that they used for BTAS because if they did, I would have loved it as a fan, but it just would have felt like a copy and paste of the old show. So I'm happy that they came up with something a little bit different. It's still true to what we know, but they've taken it in a different direction and it's very well executed. And for the most part, it works really well. So, as always, I am going to give a quick recap of what's happened so far and then after that, we're going to get straight into talking about episode 1, the season 2 premiere, Brute Force. So, we saw at the end of season 1, Thorne's men, Bullock and Flass, were seeking revenge on Harvey Dent, and this led to Batman and Barbara Gordon reluctantly joining forces and working together. So we saw Harvey Dent sacrificed himself to save Barbara Gordon from Flass, and this led to Harvey Dent eventually dying. And after Batman spared Flass, this led to Batman sending a warning to Rupert Thorne that the war had only just begun. And we also saw at the very end of season 1, the last shot we saw is a mysterious man killing a series of victims with a toxin that makes them laugh uncontrollably and leaves them dead with a smile on their face. So the end of season 1 hinted at who is going to be the main villain for season 2. So, with that all said, let's not waste any more time. Let's get straight into it. Let's talk about episode 1, the season 2 premiere, Brute Force. So, this episode kicked off with introducing us to a new version of the Mad Hatter, who is now a female called Hattie Tech, who is a talk show host. And we see her using her influence on television to garner support for the crime boss, Rupert Thorne, who is awaiting trial. And Hattie Tech reveals that the case against Rupert Thorne rests on the testimony of his accountant, Julian Gregory. We also see Rupert Thorne has ordered his lieutenant, who is highly unstable, and that is Edward Nigma, who we all know as the Riddler, and he gives him orders to kill his accountant, Julian Gregory. And also, we see Commissioner Gordon assigns Renee Montoya as Flass's new partner to investigate. So I thought this was quite an interesting take, having Edward Nigma as a gangster and lieutenant for Rupert Thorne, because when we think of the Riddler, we think of the bowler hat wearing wacky villain who constantly loves challenging Batman in a battle of wits to see who is the smartest, and of course, constantly coming out with "Riddle me this, Batman." With the Riddler in Batman Caped Crusader, he's more of an unhinged gangster. And don't get me wrong, I love the Riddler. He's one of my favourite Batman villains. But I like the idea that he's a gangster. But I feel that unless someone told you who that was, you wouldn't necessarily knew it was the Riddler because he just felt like a generic gangster. He didn't really have any of the hallmarks that we know as the Riddler. But I thought they did a good job with him, being a unhinged, unstable lieutenant. But I would have preferred that they could have kept him as the Riddler, or at least give him a nickname, you know, Mr. Question or Mr. Riddle or something like that, or just a little hint. But I thought the way he was executed for the most part worked. But as I said, I preferred the classic Riddler. So we see Batman has foiled Edward Nygma's initial attack on Julian Gregory, and this prompts Nygma to visit Dr. Hugo Strange. Now, Hugo Strange has had a very interesting history in animated media. He hasn't really had that many appearances. He was in one episode of BTAS, and he wasn't in TNBA. He was in a couple of episodes of The Batman. Had to do that. But that's about it. Hugo Strange has not had that many appearances in animated media. So it's cool that they introduced him in Batman Caped Crusader, but he's got a very small role. So we see that Nygma uses the toxin on his lackey, Mark Desmond, and it turns him into a monster. Now, anybody who probably doesn't know that name, Mark Desmond is, of course, Blockbuster. Now, Blockbuster was one of the big hitters in the comic books, and he shares an interesting connection to Batman because a long time ago, when Mark Desmond was a little boy, Bruce Wayne saved him from drowning, and he's never forgotten that. So even after Desmond was transformed into a hulking monster, anytime he saw Bruce Wayne, he never attacked him. He always remembered, that's the guy who saved my life when I was a child. He saved me from drowning. I don't want to hurt the guy who saved my life. Now, he doesn't think twice about laying some hits on Batman, but he would never harm Bruce Wayne. Now, we didn't really get that in this episode, but it was still cool to see him as Blockbuster. So we see Desmond attacks the safe house where Gregory's being kept, and we see Batman comes to the rescue once again, intervenes, stops Desmond from taking out Gregory. And we also see Gregory, who is severely injured. He testifies, but Rupert Thorne's corrupt influence threw the case out. So Rupert Thorne was acquitted and was not had any charges brought against him, and he was free to go. So as we saw Rupert Thorne leaving the courtroom, we see him driven away by his driver. Now, here's where things got really interesting. The driver, you don't really see his face as such because he's all covered up. He pats Rupert Thorne on the back very gently. Now, there's a little clue to that, which I'll touch upon in a moment. So, Rupert Thorne gets in his car with his son, and as they're driving, the driver doesn't say a word. You see a little glimpse of his face, looks a little bit mysterious and very sinister. And Rupert Thorne starts laughing. Now, at first, his son is thinking, oh, Dad's just laughing. It's just a joke. He finds it amusing. But then Rupert Thorne laughs uncontrollably, and he eventually dies by this laughing toxin, which was administered by his driver. Now, this is the first hint that we have of the Joker. He was hinted at the end of season one, who was experimenting with a series of victims who were left dead with a big grin on their face. And this is kind of like a throwback to Joker's first appearance back in issue one of Batman in 1940. The Joker, in his first appearance in that comic book, he disguised himself as a cop. Obviously, he doesn't exactly disguise himself as a cop in this episode, but you could clearly see that they were paying homage to Joker's first appearance. And I loved it. I loved that they're not just flat out introducing the Joker straight away, they're slowly building him up as this evil, demonic monster who's going around bumping important people off with a laughing toxin. And I loved it. So we see at the end of this episode, Barbara Gordon forces Batman and her dad to talk and work things out and get them working together. And that wraps up my review on episode one, the season two premiere, Brute Force. Overall, this was a brilliant episode. This episode did an amazing job in setting up the Joker and hinting at him. And even though we don't really see the Joker as such, because he's all covered up in his disguise, you knew straight away it was him. And I thought this was a very good direction. And hinting at his presence works really well because when we do see the Joker, it's going to feel like a big deal, as it should, because he's Batman's greatest enemy. And anybody who has the title of being called Batman's greatest enemy, you've got to make them feel like a big deal. And the tone is definitely set for season two in a huge way. Rupert Thorne is the first casualty, and obviously we know there are many more to come. As far as Edward Nigma, I thought they did an okay job introducing him, but I would have preferred if he was his own man as the Riddler. At least maybe give him a nickname, Mr. Riddle or something like that. But I like the idea that he's a lieutenant for Rupert Thorne, but I still would have preferred if he was his own man. But it works, but he still feels like a generic gangster. But I appreciate that the show wanted to do something completely different. Personally, I would have liked to have seen him adapt Matt Reeves' Riddler from the Batman 2022 movie. They could have done something like that, but for the most part, it worked fine. So, in terms of my overall rating for episode one, the season two premiere, Brute Force, I'm going to give this episode an 8 out of 10. I thought this was a very good episode, off to a very strong start. Hinting at the Joker was brilliant. That, for me, was the highlight of the episode, and it really got me intrigued about what the Joker's next move is going to be. And I like that they introduced Blockbuster in this episode because Blockbuster's one of those guys, he hasn't really had a lot of animated media under his belt. So I like that they brought him in for this one episode. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on episode one, the season two premiere? Did you enjoy it? What was your thoughts on the new take for the Riddler? Did you like it? Would you have preferred if they just kept in more to the traditional Riddler? And what was your thoughts on the first hints of the Joker? Do you think they did a good job hinting at the Joker's presence? And also, what kind of role do you think the Joker is going to play in season two? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Batman Caped Crusader Season 2 review series, where I am going to be talking about Episode 2, which I'm very much looking forward to seeing, especially with the way this episode played out. Should be a good one, and I'm pumped for it. So, until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.